Salve, ben trovati nelle nostre conversazioni con gli scrittori di Noir Festival. Oggi abbiamo il piacere di incontrare uno scrittore molto british, molto inglese, che si rifà alla più pura delle tradizioni del giallo di Agatha Christie e naturalmente Sherlock Holmes. E poi vedremo che con Sherlock Holmes e anche con qualcun altro ha avuto e ha molto a che fare. Stiamo parlando di Anthony Horowitz, londinese nato nella classe del 55, scrittore, sceneggiatore, ha sceneggiato Poirot e anche una serie di grande successo, ancora oggi visibile in TV, Midsomer Murders in inglese, che noi conosciamo come l'ispettore Barnaby, che ancora si può vedere nella nostra televisione. È anche autore delle due importanti British crime series come Foyle's War e Murder in Mind, e tra le sue peculiarità c'è anche quella di essere un prolifico scrittore per gli young adults, per i libri per ragazzi, ed è l'autore del bestseller Alex Ryder. Alex Ryder, come sappiamo, è anche una serie TV molto, molto nota che tuttora possiamo vedere su Amazon Prime. E anche, come dicevo prima, fare anche con Sherlock Holmes, perché ha scritto 2 romanzi con il personaggio di Sherlock Holmes, però uno solo è stato pubblicato in italiano e si intitola La casa della seta. È anche autore di 2 romanzi della serie di James Bond, che però non sono stati ancora pubblicati in Italia. Speriamo che lo facciano presto. Anthony Horowitz ha raggiunto una grande fama, soprattutto, come dicevo prima, scrivendo di questo personaggio di Alex Ryder, che è un ragazzino di 14 anni che diventa una spia per i servizi segreti inglesi. La serie è composta di 9 libri, ma soltanto dal primo di essi è stato tratto un film nel 2006 che si intitola Alex Ryder's Homebreaker. Dopodiché la sua scrittura è molto prolifica e tocca anche altri generi, tra cui quello fantastico. A questo genere appartiene un'altra serie che si intitola I Cinque Guardiani. È una specie di Alex Ryder con streghe e diavoli, così l'ha definita lui. Di questa serie appartengono a questa serie 4 libri e in italiano per ora sono stati pubblicati soltanto i primi 2, Il varco del corvo e L'ultimo solstizio. Oggi noi parleremo di un libro che è appena stato pubblicato 2 settimane fa da Rizzoli con il titolo di I delitti della gazza, ladra. Un libro che Time Magazine ha definito l'ideale per gli amanti del mystery con trame eleganti e davvero irresistibili, e il Wall Street Journal lo ha definito un romanzo imperdibile che inserisce un giallo classico dietro una cornice moderna. E infine la rivista Kirkus assicura che i lettori che piangono ancora la scomparsa di Agatha Christie saranno molto contenti e daranno il benvenuto a questi delitti da cui non potrete staccarvi. Oltre 300.000 copie vendute tra Stati Uniti e Inghilterra e quasi 400.000 nel resto del mondo. Quindi una figura assolutamente poliedrica che spazia dal cinema alla TV e soprattutto la scrittura per adulti e per ragazzi. Sherlock Holmes, James Bond, chi più ne ha, chi più ne metta, ed è l'ospite ideale per Noir Festival. E a chi potevamo chiamare a intervistarlo se no il nostro amico Adrian Wootton, grande esperto di cinema, perché nel cinema lavora, essendo il direttore di Film London, responsabile Film Commission per le produzioni in Inghilterra, nonché a suo tempo direttore della British Film Institute e del London Film Festival, ma grande esperto anche di letteratura alta, da Shakespeare a Dickens. Ecco, Adrian Wootton, che dovrebbe essere collegato con noi, è il nostro partner in crime. Hello, Adrian. Hi.
Hello,
welcome. And welcome, Mr. Horowitz. Thank you for having accepted our invitation. Thank you. We are very happy that you are with us. I just explained for the Italian viewers a little bit of your very complicated personality of an artist, because you are an artist at 360 degrees with a lot of curiosity in various genres and in various fields. So thank you, Adrian, for giving us the chance to know better this interesting writer and screenwriter. So I pass the word to you, and we will meet soon after. We are very curious to know, first of all, what is this delitti della gazza, ladra in Italian, with these mothers of the Magpie Murders. Okay, thank you very much. See you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Marina. And I'd just like to add my welcome to Anthony. It's a great pleasure to welcome you. Sadly, not in person in Milan, but virtually to Noir and Fest. As Marina has said very effusively, and I'm sure we're going to touch on this, you are a very prolific, very diverse, critically and commercially acclaimed novelist, short story writer, and screenwriter. And we're going to range over the different elements of your career. But to begin with, because we are virtually in Italy, and your latest book to be published in Italy is indeed The Magpie Murders, I want to start by talking to you. Tell me about the genesis of Magpie Murders, because I believe it actually came to you a very long time ago when you were working on writing for the British television series Midsomer Murders, which was broadcast in Italy here as Inspector Barnaby.
Which is what it was originally called, incidentally, in England. But I came up with the new title of Midsomer Murders. I always remember saying it's not about the detective, it's about the place. It was a wonderful series to work on, based on the books of Caroline Graham. And I loved doing it and began to think at that time about writing a murder mystery of my own as a book, not as television. I'd had plenty of experience, Agatha Christie, etc., on television. And I had the idea of Magpie Murders, I think around about the 4th episode. And if you watch that episode, you will actually see that one of the actors is holding a copy of Magpie Murders. We had a prop made up for it, and there it was. It existed before it was written and was in that show. And it took me around about 15 years to, first of all, work out how to do it, and secondly, to get to be good enough to do it. I hadn't written many adult books at that time, and I felt I needed to just practice the craft a little bit before I came to that book. So it was 15 years later.
And that's very interesting that you said about the craft, because I was going to ask you, obviously, you're a hugely successful author for young adults, for children, a massive fan base, and we'll come back to the Alex Ryder books. But did you really felt that you had to kind of develop your craft and perhaps have a different mindset when you came to writing Magpie Murders?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, as you get older, you get further and further away from your audience if you're writing children's books, and that becomes quite difficult. I always used to say I didn't mind visiting schools and all the kids thought of me as a father figure, but I became uncomfortable when I was a grandfather figure. And therefore I decided that I had to move on, that as much as I loved Alex Ryder and working in the YA field, I should be writing adult books. Also, Adrian, there was a sense that my audience, the audience that had been following me when I wrote Stormbreaker and Point Blank all those years before, had grown up. And I wanted to continue writing for them. I didn't want them to go away. So adult books were the answer. And, first of all, I think I did Sherlock Holmes and I did Bond and I did other things. But always it was in my head that murder mystery was where I should be, because that had always been my great love.
And that love shines out through Magpie Murders. I mean, Magpie Murders, for those people who haven't yet read it, certainly in Italy, is actually incredibly clever and complicated and finely wrought, because it's actually 2 murder mysteries for the price of 1. You actually have a classic country house murder mystery with a classic detective from the Golden Age in a village, Atticus Pund, and you also have the murder of the author who wrote the book, which actually wraps around the actual period mystery. And I've read interviews where you've described this almost like a Swiss watch mechanism, and also yourself as a telephone engineer pulling and plugging back sockets. Tell us about that plotting, because I think it's incredibly well done, but it also must have been fiendishly difficult.
Well, the analogy with a Swiss watch is not the sort of, the diamonds and the cost of it all. It's more the fact that a watch is very complicated inside, but it's very easy because it just tells the time at a glance. And that was the idea of this book, Magpie Murders. But although it was going to be fiendishly difficult to weave together two clues across two different dimensions, a book within a book, also 50 years apart from each other, with a whole two different sets of characters. So I wanted the reader to always know where they were and what was happening, and it had to, at the same time, to be a very, very easy read. You had to get to the end of it and never feel that you were lost, and that was the most difficult part of it.
And you certainly succeed in doing that. But along the way, the thing that one of the great pleasures for anyone that is interested in crime fiction, whodunits, murder mysteries, is that you have, it seems to me, an enormous amount of fun in the book, because there are so many wonderful different literary allusions and references, the names, the characters, and I just wondered again, I mean, it seems like it must have been fun, but was also that a kind of quite complicated process in terms of how you drop and use those references all the way through the book?
I wouldn't say that was the difficulty or the complexity of it, no, because when I was writing, for example, the book inside the book, you know, Magpie Murders is the book written by Alan Conway before he is murdered and the last chapter goes missing. When I was writing that, I was completely immersed in the golden age of detective fiction. And I felt very comfortable sort of, you know, following the tropes of all my favorite writers, from Agatha Christie to Josephine Tey to Anthony Barclay, to all of these writers whom I have been reading and enjoying all my life. The more complicated aspect of it was somehow tying that into a modern world where you have a main character, Susan Ryland, who isn't even a detective. She's an editor working in a publishing company and is always commenting, almost breaking the fourth wall in the book, to comment on the nature of murder mystery and crime fiction and why we read these books and why murder appeals to us and all these questions that people have been asking for years. So I try to be sure that my books never feel complicated when I'm writing them. I enjoy the writing too much, and if I'm worrying about the content or if the words aren't coming, then something has really gone wrong.
And in terms of we'll talk about Susan Ryland in a minute, but indeed Alan Conway, but the character of Atticus Pun, you know, he's obviously drawn from different places. But were you channeling Christie and Poirot, because you've written screenplays of the classic, you know, David Suchet, Poirot, or is he more of an amalgam of several different types of characters?
I think he's an amalgam. I mean, you know, it was difficult to escape from the shadow of Hercule Poirot. I mean, that is the real problem. Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot cast very, very long shadows over pretty much all modern detective fiction. Agatha Christie herself, incidentally, acknowledged how much she had borrowed from Conan Doyle. And I guess it's only fair to say that, yes, I had borrowed from Agatha Christie. But, you know, there are certain aspects of the detective which I was determined to embrace. The detective as the outsider, for example. I like the detective as a foreigner, because I think it's quite interesting that somebody comes into an English village and has no place there and sees it through quite alien eyes. So already, even with those two descriptions, you are very much into the world of Hercule Poirot. What I tried to avoid were the sort of the mannerisms, sort of the little sirop de cassis, the moustache, obviously, the little grey cells. By making Atticus Punt a survivor from the Second World War, somebody who's been in a labor camp, it immediately gave him a level of seriousness, an understanding of evil, and a sense that he was fighting crime not as an intellectual crossword solving exercise, but because it was something that mattered to him, that was in his heart.
Yes, and I was going to say that the fact that he'd been in a concentration camp essentially gives him a grain of authenticity that kind of seems to cut through that traditional golden age mystery and gives it a contemporaneity or a verisimilitude that perhaps those classic mystery wouldn't have had, because you give him that backstory, which I think is really, really well done. And I in terms of the author who writes that story, who is himself, we discover, murdered, Alan Conway. Again, it seemed to me that you had a lot of pleasure in terms of the way in which that character is assembled. And actually, I also wondered, apart from what other authors you were referring to or perhaps using, is there an element of even in the most jokey way of autobiography in terms of Alan Conway? Because some of the I mean, actually, I think one of the villages, Orford, you actually did have a home in. You went to a boarding school, etc. There seems to be little tiny bits of using your own life as well as literary inspiration.
Well, I think there are two different things happening here, Adrian. The first thing is, I'd like to say I hope that I'm nothing like Alan Conway. I would be very sad if my publishers speak of me as an Alan Conway, who is a writer who is really not a very pleasant human being, but who is also interesting to me because he hates his own books. I mean, that's what drives him. And that actually was really the inspiration for the whole idea, which comes largely from Sherlock Holmes again, because Sir Arthur Conan Doyle creates the greatest detective in modern detective fiction, and a character who is loved all over the world. And what does he do with this character? He throws him off a waterfall because he can't bear writing about him. And I always thought it was fascinating that Doyle hoped to be remembered for books like The White Company and Micah Clarke, books which I have actually read, but which have been pretty much entirely forgotten. So that's where Alan Conway comes from, rather than from anything to do with me. But what you're noticing inside the book is another idea that I had, which is, it's a little bit like those Russian dolls that nest inside each other. You've got at the heart of it a character called Atticus Punt, who lives in the 1950s world and visits fictitious villages like Saxby-on-Avon. But he has been created by the outer doll, who is Alan Conway, who is a real character who lives in a real place, London, and goes to real restaurants like the Ivy or whatever, and has a real life. But actually, that isn't true either. And I just wanted to remind the reader that there is a third doll who has created both Alan Conway and Atticus Punt, and that, of course, is me and my life. And because the book is so much about writing and writers and the act of writing and the reason why we read books and the nature of crime fiction, I wanted just to have a gentle reminder of this third world. And so I deliberately incorporated places which, if you have looked me up on Google, you will find, such as, for example, Orford in Suffolk, where I spent a lot of time and wrote a lot of the book. Crete is mentioned. The book finishes in Crete, and that is somewhere that is very, very close to my heart. You've referenced also the boarding school. There are other things hidden inside the book as well, which actually refer to my life. And indeed, there are in the book, in that outer world, even a couple of characters who exist in real life. Agatha Christie's grandson, for example, turns up. I had lunch with him and recorded the conversation and then put it into the book. So I'm playing with different sorts of reality.
And in terms of that playing with different sorts of reality, I mean, I like the character of Susan Ryland very much, and obviously you have gone on, for the benefit of readers that don't know, and we already have, I'm delighted to say, a continuation of her life and well, her adventures in Moonflower Murders. But also, am I right in thinking this is probably one of the first books where you've had a major female protagonist kind of, leading your work in that sense? And I just wondered, was that exciting? Was that, how much of a challenge was it to create that more rounded female character? Because she does come across with I think a real kind of authenticity, not just because of her work and her her role as an editor, but you give her an ordinariness, a believability, I think, in the book, which helps in terms of all the other realities, as you've described, that you're playing with.
Well, thank you very much for the observation and for the question, Adrian, because it matters a lot to me that that character should have worked. You're absolutely correct. It is the first lead female. There have been women in my writing, of course, and in my television scripts, obviously, but this is the first time that the narrator has been a woman, and I absolutely loved writing her. I found myself in a strange way empowered by her, by crossing the genders, and I, in a way, the reason I wrote a sequel, I mean, the first book, Magpie Murders, only came out in Italy a month or so ago.
Yeah, exactly.
But already in England, we've got the second book, Moonflower Murders, yet more M's, I'm afraid. And one of the reasons I wrote the second book was that I so enjoyed writing in the voice of Susan Ryland. She is based partly on one of my former editors, a lady by the name of Susan Lamb, and again, playing games and having jokes inside the book. A Ryland is actually a breed of lamb. So you've got Susan Lamb becomes Susan Ryland. She's not entirely that character, but I have been fortunate to work with a great many, you know, very smart women. My wife is one of them, who produces a lot of my television, and trying to think like them and trying to get into their heads and to write with their voice was, first of all, a challenge. But the more I did it, the more I enjoyed it, and the more I began to regret I hadn't done it years before.
Interesting. In terms of the you know, obviously Magpie Murders internationally has already been, it's just come out, as you said, in Italy. It's already been a huge success. It's prompted the continuation. And also you are, I understand, you may have finished it, you may be in the middle of it. You're writing, it's been announced, the television series of Magpie Murders. You're actually writing, I believe, a multi-part television series of it for PBS. And I just wondered if you could, because I wanted to talk about your screenwriting, about what, you know, this was inspired and went back to a television series back in the 1990s. You transferred it, you know, 15 years later into a novel. Now you're taking the novel and translating it into a multi-part television series. And I just wondered what the experience was of doing that. Are you enjoying the process of reconverting Magpie Murders?
Well, first of all, the scripts are written, and we actually start shooting. We start shooting in 3 weeks' time, which is quite scary. Peter Cattiano, who is a wonderful director of The Full Monty, is directing it.
Really?
Yeah, and talking about strong women, we have an absolutely wonderful piece of casting for Susan Ryland. Leslie Manville is taking that part.
Oh, brilliant!
It really infuriates me that I'm not allowed to say at this moment who is playing Atticus Punt. But again, we have a piece of casting that is so wonderful and so huge, really, that I couldn't believe it when this actor took the part. So it's all looking very good. But in answer to your question, the actual adaptation was murderously difficult. It took me 2 years, and I think something like 9, 10, 11 drafts to get right. There were all sorts of problems and difficulties I had to face trying to squeeze this out of a book and back onto television. I'll just give you one example. In the book, the first 250 or 300 pages are all the book inside the book. They're all Atticus Punt, and they're all the murder mystery that takes place in Saxby-on-Avon. And the main character, Susan Ryland, only turns up on about page 280. It would have been impossible to have got an actor of Leslie Manville's talents if she didn't turn up until episode 4. So the first thing I had to do was to make sure that she was in it from episode 1 onwards. And that, of course, meant really ripping up the book and reassembling the pages in a completely different order. So I think what is great is that the TV series will really surprise people who have read the book, because we've had to do so many things in a different way. But that also means that it isn't just a sort of a reproduction. It is a new piece of work. And I'm very happy and excited by it.
So actually, it'll be quite intriguing for those of us that have read the book, because it'll be actually a fresh experience watching the television series because of the work you've had to do to re-engineer it for that medium. Absolutely right.
I mean, again, we have to run the 2 murder investigations, the one in the 1950s and the modern one, side by side, because that's the only way to do it. So you've actually got them running, instead of one after another, you have them running in parallel, and you keep bouncing back and forth between them. And if you want to use the word complicated, making sure that the audience would know where they were, who each character was, what they were doing, and where they'd got to in the story. That was, to me, the biggest challenge of these scripts. But I think, you know, the fact that we've managed to raise the money and attracted the talent, and the fact that we're about to start shooting, says, I hope that, you know, we have succeeded. We'll wait and see. Another year we'll know.
Well, fingers crossed. And my appetite is already extremely whetted to see the series. But just going back to Magpie Murders for a second, to the actual novel. I mean, one of the things, again, I love about it, apart from all the literary allusions and references and all the things you do, is that you seem not only to be having fun with the genre, but you also seem to be in a position in writing the novel where you interrogate the genre, and you use almost every form. Susan Ryland uses almost every form of kind of analytical analysis, you know, in terms of to interrogate the narrative of the book, to get it to reveal its secrets, what, you know, the anagrams, etc., etc. There's every element, and I just wondered, is that part of the way you think about when writing crime fiction, etc.? Are you a great crossword puzzler? Do you like? Have you got that mindset, that sort of investigative mindset, so that you could apply that in terms of the way in which you were writing?
Well, I do love crosswords, that's for sure. My favorite crossword, for what it's worth, is in the Spectator magazine, which is a crossword which not only has clues and answers, but also has a secret hidden inside the crossword, a little bit like a whodunit has a secret, who is the murderer. So I do love crosswords, and I love word plays, and I love trickery of every sort. But I've always been interested in the nature of whodunits, about why we read them, why we're interested in them, and also whether it is actually worth our while. I used to say that, an episode of since you mentioned it, Midsummer Murders, would take me maybe 3 or 4 months to write, and it would take an audience 2 hours of their life to watch. And was it enough simply that you got to the end of the show, the butler did it? Right. And I began to be interest myself in the idea that maybe whodunits could work harder, but you could use this genre to do different things and to present murder in a way that hadn't been done before. That was the inspiration for Magpie Murders, and indeed for the Hawthorne novels, in which I myself appear as a character.
Yes.
And therefore, and this is not an ego trip, it's merely a way of taking the whodunit and turning it upside down, because in the Hawthorne books, the character who should be the cleverest person, the author who knows everything and has planned everything, is now the narrator who knows nothing and doesn't have a book unless the detective solves it. So again, that raises all sorts of questions about murder mystery. And I should add that for 16 years, I was writing a TV series called Foyle's War.
Which I love.
What was interesting about Foyle's War was that although it pretended to be a detective series, and it did have suspects, murders and clues and red herrings and a reveal at the end, what always drove me in that series, was first of all, the true stories of the Second World War, telling stories that hadn't been told before. And also the idea that murder during the Second World War was valueless. Who cares if there is a body in the library in Dover when 50 miles across there are 500 bodies in 500 libraries, killed in the war? And that was the whole paradox. That was the excitement for me of that series, writing about a detective who really didn't have a role. And it was the beginning of a journey to just question the whole nature of murder mystery.
And I think that's done brilliantly in Foyle's War. I'm not sure how much access the Italian audience that we're talking to today has to Foyle's War, but I think it is on Amazon, and actually people should go and watch all of the 9, I think, series of it that you made between 2005 and 15, because I think it's one of the great crime inverted commas television series that's on British television over the last few years. So I'm a huge admirer. But that brings me back to your television screenwriting, because you've described how difficult it was to translate Magpie Murders into a television series. A lot of novelists are very sniffy, frankly, about screenplays. They don't like writing them. They say, I just want somebody else to deal with it. I'm not, let me buy the adaptation, you get on with it, you have the pain. You have consistently, from the beginnings of your career, written for television and for film, and you don't seem to have any kind of, obviously, as you said, your wife is the producer of Foyle's War, amongst many other things. So am I right in thinking that you don't regard writing screenplays, even when they're difficult to do, as in Magpie Murders, as a chore, but it's another dimension of your craft, of your ability as a writer?
Writing for me is never a chore. Whatever it is I'm writing, even an email to the dentist, it's something I enjoy writing. I love writing. I love words. I love fountain pens, paper, ink, computers. The whole panoply of writing is something that I love. As to film versus books, or TV versus books, I've always thought, when I was writing my young books, my Alex Ryder books, that I was writing for a very visual generation. I am of the age, I suspect a little older than you, Adrian, that when I was a child, I was growing up in a literary world. The word was what mattered. We had maybe 1 or 2 televisions in the house, and they had 1 or 2 or maybe 3 channels on them when I was growing up. And special effects were not very special. If a spaceship landed, it was probably a plate on the end of a fishing rod. But a modern audience is surrounded by image. A modern audience sees on the screen every day cities blown up, London, New York, Chicago, wherever, whole worlds exploding, incredible special effects. We have 25 or 35 different channels. Everybody is looking at images on their phones, on the computer as we are now, on iPads, you know, wherever. So therefore, I've always thought that a novel, to an extent, has to work in the same way as a film. It has to be visual, it has to be seen, it has to have the same pace, the same beats, the same flow. One of my favorite openings of any book is Goodbye to Berlin, which I hope I've got the right book, where Christopher Isherwood writes, I am a camera. And to me, that is what I've always been, a camera. When I start writing a book, whether it's Magpie Murders, or which I think opens in a cemetery with 2 people digging a grave, or maybe it begins, oh, that's the book within the book. But whatever it is, I start as a camera sitting on the edge of the church steeple, maybe, looking down into the cemetery at these 2 people, and then I cut in close for their conversation. That's how I write.
And let's talk about, because there's been a few references now to Alex Ryder. Obviously, you're one of your most famous and memorable characters written for children and young adults, which is still going remarkably. 13 books, 12 novels on strong. You only published a new one at the beginning of last year, and you seem to have retained your audience over all these years, from Stormbreaker back in the turn of the 21st century to now. So over that sort of 20 years, you've written those novels, and you seem to have also found fresh inspiration in those novels, even though that the original audience has got older and become the Magpie Murders audience. And I just wondered, where do you keep that inspiration for Alex Ryder coming from? And also, do you feel the pressure of your audience, because you have such a huge fan base with Alex Ryder, and I know that the books are published over here, and actually the wonderful Amazon television series is also available over here in Italy.
Well, to answer the second part of that question first, I don't remember now what the question was. Now I think about it.
The question was, how do you, the inspiration, you're 13 books in, how do you keep Alex Ryder fresh?
I was going to stop writing Alex Ryder. I did give up. After Russian Roulette, I announced that was the end of the series and I wasn't going to do any more, mainly because I was afraid that the books would no longer be fresh. One of the things that I have avoided in my whole life of writing is the idea of formula. I could have been writing my 30th or my 40th Alex Ryder book by now if I had just stuck doing Alex Ryder. And I do love those books, but I didn't want them to become, just turned out for the next check. There had to be a reason to write it, and I was nervous, so I stopped. Then I realized, after 4 or 5 years of a gap, that actually I wasn't finished with the character. I was obviously getting a lot of tweets and emails from people who wanted to see more. I wrote a collection of short stories just to keep my publishers happy. I missed the character, and I did realize that actually there were more adventures, there were more gadgets, there was more action I could think of. I'm looking out as I speak to you now at the Shard, which has a huge part to play in the last book I wrote, and which there's a sequence in it which I absolutely adored writing. And it was sitting here staring me in the face while I was working. So I sort of had to go back and write it. And as I wrote the book, particularly the last one, Nightshade, I realized that, to my surprise, there was still a lot there to do, that I could still enjoy it. And to me, sometimes I look at my career and the kind introduction I was given today, and I think to myself, I've made a mistake because I've been so prolific and I've done so many different things, but in a way, it makes it harder for booksellers and publishers and even for my readers to know quite what's coming next. And there are writers, I think, who are probably happier because everybody knows what to expect and look forward to the next book. But that is just how it is for me. Writing has always been, for me, an adventure and a journey. And I've always tried to find ways to do things, whether we've talked a lot about murder mystery and how to do it in a different way, but that's been true of Alex Ryder and Russian Roulette didn't even have Alex in it. It was a book about an assassin. And so that was quite a step in the dark. It's just how I've always been. I can't really explain it, but I'm always looking for the next surprise.
And in terms of a surprise. I mean, I liked, by the way, the original 2005 film of Stormbreaker, and actually my organisation, Film London, we supported the shooting of that film all those years ago, and Mark, the producer, and actually I'm indebted to you and him, because it was I actually got to meet Mickey Rourke as a result of Stormbreaker, but the film didn't achieve the commercial success that we'd all hoped it would, and didn't continue in the way that it did. But now you have this new television series adapted by Guy Burt, and I have to say, I think it's terrific, not as a young adult television series, but as a great TV show that happens to be about a teenage espionage agent, but is absolutely really captivating for adults. And I think Amazon and with the production company have done a terrific job. And so you must be delighted about that. But also, were you ever tempted? Did you want to write any of the screenplays of it yourself, or was this something that you really wanted to have other people do?
I think the best thing my wife did with that film, the TV series, was to fire the writer. Although actually, to be fair, I couldn't write it because I was writing Nightshade at the time, and I couldn't have been doing a novel and a TV series. But I had said to her from the start that I thought A Fresh Pair of Eyes would be sensible, that it was a good idea to step aside. Incidentally, I'm now remembering that you and I, of course, did meet many, many years ago. We stood together in Hyde Park on horses, as Alex escaped on a horse. A long, long time ago now, but that's where you and I last crossed swords. The film was a disappointment. I mean, there's no getting around it. I don't think it was a bad film. I thought it had a lot of good things in it, and as is often the case, timing didn't help it. It opened at the wrong time, and there are lots of reasons why films work or don't work. But looking at the new Amazon series, which has worked really triumphantly around the world, I think that Guy Burt did a brilliant job in, first of all, making it older. I mean, that was the big thing about the Stormbreaker. Stormbreaker movie was in many ways too young. It was too tame. I think it was slightly tougher, slightly harder TV series with an older actor, Otto Farrant, an absolutely wonderful Alex Ryder. He's actually 21 years old. So you've moved away from the sort of like any idea that this is about a 14-year-old. And, I have been involved with it. I'm an executive producer. I've done a little bit of writing here and there. But it's been a real pleasure just to sit back and to see it, enjoy the success. But, in my heart, I wish Stormbreaker had too.
Yeah, and the great news is that it's been recommissioned, and we're going to have
we are indeed shooting the next. We're shooting Eagle Strike at this very moment. So it's extraordinary to think that in 3 weeks' time I will have 2 productions, both of them battling against all the rigors and the regulations of COVID, but happening on different sides of the country.
Fantastic! That's very exciting. And let's just talk quickly about before we run out of time about the other 2, in a sense, giants in whose footsteps you inhabited and took on. First off, not published yet in Italy, which I hope that actually the 2 James Bond novels that you have authored are published in Italy soon, because actually an Italian audience should have the opportunity of reading them, because they're a real joy. And you started with Trigger Mortis, and you've written a second one. And I just wondered, in terms of difficulty, because I know I've talked actually recently to John Banville and about adapting and writing a Raymond Chandler, Philip Marlowe novel, and the challenges of not being cliched and not getting too far into being a sort of period pastiche. And it seems to me you steer the tightrope through James Bond, because it would be very, very easy to be a pastiche of Fleming in terms of the anachronisms of the books. And you successfully, it seems to me, to negotiate that tightrope. And I just wonder how difficult it was, because it seems like you did an awful lot of research in preparing to write the first book.
Ian Fleming is a writer I have always admired and loved throughout my whole life. That's where I came in on. The fact that I agreed to do it because Fleming was a huge inspiration for me when I was as young as 10, 11 years old, and Dr. No came out on the cinema, and that led me to the books, and I inhabited that world. And again, with Fleming, the secret for me, first of all, is to stick to the timeline, stick to his rules. Other writers, William Boyd did a very, very good book, so did Sebastian Faulks, but they didn't stick to the 1950s, 60s maybe Sebastian did, but certainly William Moot is too much later. And also, of course, Geoffrey Deaver wrote a Bond novel which was set in the present age. Yeah. To me, the period is very, very important. The setting is important. Fleming's tricks, I look into the books, I see how he writes them. I see the sort of tropes he has as a writer. And at the end of the day, the secret of writing a Bond novel for me is, first of all, to forget anything about my own writing habits and my own beliefs and my own style, and to try and to live entirely inside Fleming's world and to raise my game. I think Fleming is a much better writer than people perhaps remember. If anybody watching this wants to go back to a Fleming novel like From Russia with Love or Dr. No or any of the early Bonds, really, they are in their way real masterpieces of style and of descriptive power and of action and adventure and suspense. He is a fantastic creation. So really, it's a case of hiding inside those books, raising my game, and not worrying too much about what the world may think.
And the world, obviously, because you did inhabit that milieu, and I think that's one of the really clever things in terms of the first book set a few weeks after the end of Goldfinger, essentially, and then the second novel actually going as a sort of prequel to Casino Royale, is that you have stayed within that world that Fleming created and not tried to break out of it. But I wondered in terms of that, and obviously that's worked because as far as I can see, the books have been very, very popular and people have responded very positively to them. So I wonder, by way of a complete contrast, you've already mentioned your deep admiration for Arthur Conan Doyle. You've mentioned how Doyle was very frustrated by having to keep on writing Holmes. And you've written not one, but two, although Holmes doesn't really appear in very much in the second one, Moriarty, but The House of Silk. And obviously there's a stylistic challenge, there's a character challenge, there are all kinds of challenges about dealing with one of the great progenitors of crime fiction, not just the character, but the author. And I just wondered, you obviously enjoyed the process of doing it. You wouldn't have written two of them if you hadn't. But can you tell us how that differed from say, doing Fleming? Well,
the main difference is one of history, because the Doyle novels are taking place, towards the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century as well. Some of the later stories, there is more distance there. You're dealing with a sort of more of a museum piece. So therefore, actually, it's a safer ground. You're not going to offend anybody by creating, for example, a Pussy Galore style character, or getting into sort of trouble with sort of PC elements. And Holmes is the other similarity of Bond is that there isn't a lot of it. There's not a great many stories and novels. So once again, it's quite easy to read the entire canon, to work out the tropes, to immerse yourself in the world, and again, to obey the rules. So your question is what was different between them? But actually what really struck me was how similar they were in so many different ways, but that I could play the same game again, never breaking faith with Doyle, or for that matter, Doyle's fans. I'll give you an example. There was only one woman in Sherlock Holmes's life, Irene Adler. Yes. So therefore, as an adapter, or as an addition, as writing an additional book in the Holmes canon, I cannot introduce a romantic interest, a young woman for Holmes to have a relationship with, because that would be breaking faith with what Doyle has already taught me. You might like to know, when I wrote the Doyle novel and the Fleming novel, I had signed copies of their books in front of me. So I had a Doyle signature and I had an Ian Fleming signature, and I had to feel that they were sort of in the room with me, watching over my shoulder, inspiring me, but also making sure that I didn't do anything that they would be offended by. And that was, so I would have said that the process of writing the two books was actually remarkably similar. But if you're looking for which was the easier, not a word I particularly like, it was probably Holmes. It was certainly safer.
And do you think now that you've because you have projected yourself into your literary and to a certain extent character heroes or two of them, has that exercised that particular itch? Have you scratched that now? Do you think actually, I don't want to do that again, or would you write another James Bond novel? Would you go back to Holmes again, or do you feel that you've done that now and explored that and proved really with consummate skill that you can more than do it, but you can create books that audiences want to read, and therefore you put those back on the shelf? Or would you go back to them, or indeed another writer that you admire?
I don't think there are any other writers I would like to write continuation novels of. The one exception to that is I've always had a sort of a yearning to finish Tintin and the Alpha Art, because Hergé has been a great inspiration for me, and that's an unfinished book, the last ever Tintin book. Hergé died during the writing of it, and I've always wanted to know what happened next. So that's probably the only exception. As to Holmes and Bond, I would like to do one more Holmes, because there's a title, The Giant Rat of Sumatra, mentioned by Watson in one of the short stories, that there was a case called The Giant Rat of Sumatra. I'd love to know what it was and how Holmes got involved with it and what happened. So I would write that. As for Bond, I feel a sort of possessive quality about Bond. I mean, I love Bond so much that I can't bear anybody else to do it except for me. So would I do a third? I would be tempted, I must be honest with you. A trilogy sounds like a nice thing to have done. You know, Forever and a Day set at the very beginning of his career, Trigger Mortis the middle of his career, maybe one more at the end of the career. But you know, I can't say that will definitely happen. It's just it's something that I wouldn't say no to.
No, and that seems to me that would be quite wonderful. But we've heard today. I mean, we've heard today a lot about Magpie Murders, which the Italian audience are just having the opportunity to read. We know there's a sequel to that. It's fantastic that there's 2 new television series coming, Alex Ryder 2 and also the Magpie Murders. Are you also writing a new novel as well?
Well, I've just finished a 3rd Hawthorne novel, Alone to Kill, which follows on from The Word is Murder and The Sentence is Death, and is set on the island of Alderney during a literary festival in which Hawthorne and myself are the guests of honor. And the joke of the book is that there hasn't been a murder in Alderney in thousands of years, but of course, 3 days after we turn up, the bodies begin to fall. So I've had enormous fun writing that, and I'm just finishing that. I'm doing a new children's book, a Diamond Brothers book, which I began during COVID as sort of it was on my website for free, and I've just writing that.
Which you're donating the profits to the NHS, I believe. Is that?
That's right. It's actually I'm giving the money's actually going to a sort of since Colonel Major Tom. I feel that the NHS has probably had my tiny contribution would vanish. So I'm going to give it to a local charity rather than to a national one. But that's still the same idea, and it's based on a very old film which I used to love called Where Eagles Dare. And the book is called Where Seagulls Dare. So that's something else I have to finish. And then after that, I mean, where are we now? February, March. I don't know what I'm going to be doing at the end of this year, but I suspect it'll be another novel of some sort or other.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Anthony. The career is amazing. We've got a lot of treats coming our way of new television series and new novels, which we're very excited about. So thank you so much for being our guest and talking so eloquently about your work generally and Magpie Murders specifically today. It's been a pleasure to welcome you to Noir and Fest, and I hope at some point when we can all meet in reality, maybe we'll have you back to Noir and Fest actually in person in Milan. So thank you very much, Anthony Horowitz.
And Adrian, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
And I am thanking you and I'm showing you to all our audience, Italian audience, the book, I delitti della gazza, ladra, pubblicato da Rizzoli. And I'm thanking you and I'm officially inviting you, Mr. Horowitz, to the Noir Festival next edition in presence as a member of our film jury. Because as you know, we are also a film festival with competition. We premiered the most important thrillers and blockbusters even in Italy and sometimes in Europe too. So we are waiting for you as a member of the film jury because I think you deserve, and we deserve also.
Marina, it would be both an honor and a pleasure to accept. Thank you so much. I'd love to come.
Thank you all, and arrivederci. Thank you, Adrian.
Bye. Have a good day, everybody.
Grazie a tutti.